There are things more romantic in the world than just love. The day I met Uncle Sam, I was fighting with a few other beggar kids over a white steamed bun. Unlike an apple, the bun wasn't hard, and with all the tugging and pulling, we had crushed it into crumbs. After all that effort, we ended up picking up nothing but the scattered pieces. Uncle Sam was a beggar like me, but he was older. Judging by his appearance, he looked around 40. He watched us with interest as we fought, and I really hated his filthy, wrinkled face. It was even uglier than the old trees on the street. I wasn't going to waste my time with an old fool. I looked up at the sky, a brilliant blue, and the dazzling sunlight made me sneeze. Every time I finished eating, I would look up at the sky. I learned this from another old beggar, who said that beggars lived at the mercy of the heavens. He would always clasp his hands together after a meal, saying with great sincerity, "Thank the heavens for letting me see the sun tomorrow." I was only 6 years old and didn't understand much. I just thought the sun was a warm and comforting thing, and I hoped I could see it every day. Nearby, a few kids were fighting over toys while the adults laughed. How nice, I thought, with a pang of envy. We were both kids, but they fought over toys for fun, while we fought over buns for survival. I was drawn to the toys and edged closer. The adults looked at me with disgust and pulled their children away. As if they were so great, I didn't care. When I grew up and had the ability, I'd buy all sorts of toys, and I wouldn't have to fight anyone for them. Even as a beggar, I had dreams. "Hey, kid, come over here," Uncle Sam called to me. I glared at him. I hated it when people ordered me around, especially in such a rude tone like his. When I didn't respond, he pulled out a cloth doll from behind his back, a monkey with a long tail. I didn't know which cartoon it was from. Because of its long tail, which could probably be tied into 3 knots, I called it Long-Tailed Monkey. Kids can never resist the lure of toys or sweets. I immediately walked over to him, trying to show that I was friendly. "Here, play with it," he grinned, showing his big white teeth. His face was so dark, I figure he must have worked in a coal mine at some point. His eyes, though, were bright, and when he smiled, his thick eyebrows looked full of energy. I took the little monkey and sat down next to him. It was the first toy I ever owned. "Is it fun?" he asked me. His hair was bathed in sunlight, but it didn't shine or look smooth. Not really. I had craved it when I didn't have it, but once I had it, it felt boring. The difference was that when I didn't have it, I could only touch it carefully, but when I had it, I could play with it however I wanted. It wasn't nearly as thrilling as when I longed for it. I thought I must be a mature child because the moment I got the toy, I felt like I'd grown up. "You little rascal," he laughed, showing his wide grin. "Old man," I shot back. And then we both laughed out loud. The sunlight poured across the ground, dazzling and bright. The birds in the trees were chirping, amused by our laughter. Springtime sunlight is fleeting, disappearing without a word of goodbye. When the sun leaves, the wind takes its chance to show off. It sneaks into your collar and into your chest. I huddled, shrinking into myself. My clothes were too thin and I was cold. I needed to find a place to hide from the wind. Here, just as I was about to leave, he pulled out a ragged jacket from his tattered bag. I quickly put it on. It was big, but it was warm. I grinned at him, feeling that maybe he wasn't so bad after all. "How old are you?" 6. In truth, I didn't know how old I was. 6 was just someone's guess. So I clung to it, making sure to remember that I was 6. If I hadn't met Uncle Sam, I think I would have lived through several more 6 years. Uncle Sam sighed. I found it amusing and copied him, letting out a big sigh too. "What are you sighing about, kid? Come on, I'll take you to have some fun." He knocked me lightly on the head. It hurt a little. With nowhere else to go, I followed him. He took me to an abandoned factory. He said it was where he stayed. There was a pile of random junk on the ground. I had no idea where he'd found it all. There were even toys, little cars, toy guns, and tin boxes with cartoon characters. "Go ahead, play with them, kid," he said with a smile. Since I already had the long-tailed monkey, I wasn't interested in these toys. Living alone in such a big place seemed extravagant, so I decided I'd move in too. I want to stay here too. Call me Uncle and you can stay. Uncle. Good kid. From then on, we depended on each other. His name was Sam Hui, and I called him Uncle Sam. I didn't have a name, so he just called me Kid. He braided my hair. He said I was a girl and should have braids. Even though the braids looked terrible, I was still happy. We wandered together, chasing stray dogs as we ran. We watched the sunrise and the sunset together. With Uncle Sam around, I never had to fight with the other beggar kids for food. Aside from begging, Uncle Sam would dig through trash cans, collecting bottles and cans to sell for money. If he was lucky, he'd even find decent toys. That summer, I had my first ice cream bar. The cool, sweet taste danced on my tongue, becoming one of the most unforgettable memories of my childhood. Sam took me back to his hometown because once I snuck into a school and was kicked out when I got caught. I couldn't understand why other kids could go in, but I couldn't. Sitting on the roadside, I began wailing loudly, practically throwing a tantrum. It must have been an ugly sight because a few people went out of their way to avoid me. Sam heard my cries and rushed over, thinking I had gotten into a fight. I pointed to the school nearby and told Sam, "I want to go in." Sam looked at the school, his lips twitching slightly, but he didn't say anything. He wiped my tears away and pulled me along. "Kid, do you want to go to school?" Sam asked me one day as we basked in the sun against a wall. I looked at him and nodded my head vigorously. I envied those kids so much. Their clean clothes, the way they held hands, singing and dancing together. It felt different from wanting a doll. It wasn't something that could be satisfied with a glance. It made me want to be part of it even more. Sam seemed sad. At least, that's how it looked to me. He wasn't as cheerful as usual. After a long while, he simply said, "All right." By then, I was already dozing off and didn't really understand what his all right meant. The next morning, Sam woke me up early and said we needed to pack up and head to his hometown. He grabbed an old kettle he'd found from the trash and went to a nearby factory to get some hot water. "Kid, wash your hair nice and clean," he instructed me. After I washed, he took a rusty pair of scissors and cut off all my tangled hair. The scissors were rusty in parts, and they would sometimes snag my hair, making me wince in pain. I wouldn't be able to wear little braids now. I touched my newly cropped hair and sighed for a moment. Then Sam washed his own hair and used his reflection in the glass to trim it short. The uneven look made him seem a bit odd. We laughed out loud at each other's new appearances. He changed into a set of clothes that, while worn, were clean. Then he found a clean outfit for me too. And just like that, Sam walked ahead with 2 large bags on his back, and I followed behind. We boarded a bus. I asked Sam where we were going. Sam said we were going to his hometown, and he was going to take me to the village so I could go to school. He smiled naively after saying that, showing his big white teeth as always. I was overjoyed, my heart bouncing along with the bumps of the bus ride. After getting off the bus, Sam and I walked for a long time, passing through several villages before finally arriving at his hometown. Sam said he used to live in this village. The villagers were shocked to see us. Many of them had thought Sam had died somewhere out there. They even said I was a child Sam had abducted. They called Sam a scoundrel and secretly told me to stay away from him. But I didn't listen to them. I knew they looked down on Sam just because he was a beggar. Sam took me to the village committee and told the secretary that he had returned and wanted to register me in the village so I could go to school. The village refused, saying my background was unclear and that registering me was impossible. Going to school wasn't as easy as Sam had made it sound either. Money was one problem, but the main issue was that they called me a black child, meaning I was unregistered and didn't belong. Even if I was black, they couldn't treat me like this. In my foolishness, I even tried scrubbing my face with sand, thinking maybe it was because I hadn't washed my face in a long time. If Sam hadn't caught me, I might have ruined my face. Later, Sam took me to town, and we knelt outside the town government's office for days. Somehow, a local newspaper heard about us, and they were eager to hear our story. They warmly invited us in and asked for details. Sam told them our story, about our life together, and how much I wanted to go to school. The newspaper people said they would help and told us to go back to the village and wait. Sure enough, the school issue was resolved, and the school even waived my tuition and book fees. Apparently, our story had been published in the newspaper. A kind-hearted business even donated some money. Being able to go to school made Sam happier than me. He gave me a name, Nora. He said he didn't have much education, but he knew that Nora, meaning promise, was a good word and surely a good name. I nodded seriously in agreement. Later, during a population census, I was finally registered. On that little red booklet, in strong, bold handwriting, head of household, Sam Wayne. Nora, relationship to household head, daughter. The official seal was clear and firm. Sam and I became a legitimate family. My grades were excellent. I almost always scored perfect on my exams, which made Sam very proud. The village even returned the land that Sam's parents had left behind before they passed away. After paying the grain taxes, we just barely had enough to eat. Sam used the remaining donation money to buy 2 piglets, saying that once they grew up, we could sell them to buy me new clothes. After the busy farming season, Sam would join the village's work team to find jobs in other villages. People in the village said that Sam had completely transformed. Many told me, "Nora, you need to study hard and take care of your uncle when you grow up. Look at him, a beggar raising you and sending you to school. It's not easy." Yes, our lives had changed drastically. We no longer had to beg for food. We were well-fed, well-clothed, and slept peacefully. Life was good. But I knew better than anyone the hardships behind those good days. He worked under the scorching sun, plowing the fields, and walked miles up the mountain to cut pig fodder. He rose before dawn every day, feeding the piglets first, then cooking for me. He never missed a single meal. For a man who had wandered and slacked off for years, this kind of life was incredibly difficult. When I was in middle school, rumors began to spread in the village. They said Sam wouldn't raise me for no reason. He was probably waiting for me to grow up, so I could warm his bed. They said Sam was indecent. They also said, despite my good grades now, spending all my time with an old man would surely lead me astray when I grew up. All their sincerity from when they encouraged me to study hard was gone. People can be such fickle creatures. I figured they were just jealous of my looks and intelligence. I was no longer the skinny, dark little beggar that had arrived in the village. After a few years of full meals, I'd gained weight, grown taller, and my skin had become fairer. I'd become pretty. I was pretty, I excelled in my studies, and no other kids in the village could compare to me. When they couldn't compete, they resorted to tearing me down, a classic case of sour grapes to ease their warped sense of jealousy. When someone can't stand to see you succeed, no insult is too vile for them to hurl at you. One day, when Sam came to pick me up from school, I got into a fight with a boy. He called me a vixen and said Sam was a shameless old man. He even accused us of being incestuous. At the time, I didn't fully understand what incest meant, but I knew it wasn't something good. A middle schooler wouldn't naturally have such dirty thoughts. It must have been something they picked up from their parents. I cursed the boy, saying his whole family would die because back then, death was the worst curse I could think of. I wasn't very good at cursing people, mostly because I'd never heard Sam curse. Sam's face darkened, and the boy shrank back a few steps in fear. Look at us, we all ride our own bikes, but she gets picked up by that man every day. It's not normal, some students whispered. If you're jealous, why don't you have your dads come pick you up too? Sam said with a grin to a few of the kids. Proudly, I hopped onto the back seat of the bike. Why did you fight him? Sam asked on the way home. He said bad things about you. I replied angrily. Do you think what he said is true? Sam asked me.
No.
Then just pretend you didn't hear it. Heaven took pity on me and let me pick up a daughter, Sam said cheerfully. I could tell he was genuinely happy. The hill we were climbing was steep, and Sam was struggling to pedal. His body was hunched forward, his legs pushing hard on the pedals, and fine beads of sweat dotted his temples. I really wanted to call him Dad in that moment. His kindness to me over the years was something words could never fully express. In my heart, I had already long considered him my dad. But after calling him Uncle Sam for so many years, suddenly changing what I called him felt awkward and a little shy. Because of this incident, Sam decided to take me away from the village. He said the environment wasn't good for my growth and that I had a bright future ahead. He didn't want me to be distracted. So, to get me into a school in the city, Sam resorted to his usual tactics, being shameless. For someone as poor as Sam, a thick skin was all he had left. Life in the city was much harder than in the countryside. Without land, everything we ate had to be bought with money. Sam did the hardest, most backbreaking work. I went to school during the day, and at night I would go with Sam to scavenge through garbage bins, looking for things we could sell. If we found anything useful, we kept it for ourselves. At some point, Sam had learned how to steam buns from someone, so he started making buns at home and selling them at the market. At that time, a kind of bun called Xiaokong buns was popular. They were white and looked appealing, but they didn't taste as good as homemade ones. Sam always used an old-fashioned sourdough starter to make his buns, and they were much tastier than those Xiaokong buns. They sold really well. But at night, we still scavenged through garbage and collected scraps. Later, I successfully passed the entrance exam for a key high school. Sam was drinking that night, and his eyes were filled with tears. Gradually, Sam's business improved, and he built up a regular customer base. Several company cafeterias even started ordering from him. With the extra money, he rented a small shop. Our lives had changed significantly. He always gave me plenty of money. He would say, "Girl, don't feel wronged in school. Spend whatever you need. We've got plenty of money now." But I couldn't bear to spend it. I knew how much sweat Sam had put into making those buns. The only way I could repay him was by studying hard so that when he talked about me to others, he could hold his head high. After I started boarding at school, Sam began to lose weight. When I came home a few times, I found him eating dry buns with just a plate of peanuts. He said that cooking for himself wasn't enjoyable when I wasn't around. But the moment I came back, he would immediately jump up and prepare a whole table of my favorite dishes. Later, I got accepted into university. I knew Sam had secretly gone back to the village to show off. He wanted those who had insulted me to see me in a new light. Before I went off to school, he bought me a mobile phone, the highly popular Nokia 7610. He said he wanted to be able to call me whenever he missed me. At that time, phones were just starting to become popular among students. He was really just worried I'd be embarrassed in front of my classmates if I didn't have one. As I neared graduation, he called me one day, complaining that business at the bun shop was getting harder. Since his buns were handmade, he was essentially just earning money for his hard labor. But faced with machine-made buns and lower prices, he had lost his advantage. Orders were dwindling. Relying only on retail sales wasn't enough to keep things going, and business had become worse and worse. I could hear the disappointment and worry in his voice over the phone. Laughing, I said, "Old man, I'm about to graduate. It's my turn to take care of you now." He laughed, saying, "All right." I began to imagine the future once I started working. I'd save up to buy a big house, a home that truly belonged to me and Sam. I'd make sure he lived out his later years like the other old folks, tending to flowers, walking birds, and enjoying a peaceful life. After graduation, I joined a foreign company as a translator, earning a decent income. Uncle Sam's bun shop had completely closed down, but he kept thinking about finding work elsewhere, constantly trying to find odd jobs. I let him do what he wanted because I knew that at his age, nobody would hire him. He still thought about going back to the countryside to farm, but he worried that if he left, I'd skimp on my meals. He would say that I had too much work pressure, wasn't eating properly, and that I would fall apart. The food outside was expensive and tasteless, he said. While I was at work, He'd stay at home and cook, waiting for me to come back. He still collected junk. He needed to keep busy to feel at ease. Later, he got sick, late-stage stomach cancer. He refused to stay in the hospital and said he wanted to go back to the countryside. He said that when people get old, they should return to their roots. I knew he was really just trying to save money. He thought I worked too hard to earn it. I secretly asked the doctor, and the doctor said that in his condition, hospitalization wouldn't make much of a difference. All it would do is reduce his pain and give some psychological comfort. I quit my job and went back to the countryside with him. The yard, uninhabited for over a decade, had fallen into disrepair. It took us some time to clean it up. I tried to stay by his side every day. His favorite thing was talking about our past, especially when we used to beg together. He would say that he must have accumulated good karma in his previous life because I was a blessing from the heavens. But really, he was the blessing sent to me. He constantly worried about my job, saying that taking a long leave wouldn't sit well with my boss and always urging me to go back. I lied to him, saying that my boss had granted me special leave, and I could take as long as I wanted. Perhaps he knew he didn't have much time left, so he smiled and agreed. He said he hadn't lived in vain, drifting through the first half of his life, then finding peace in the second. One sunny morning, he passed away, resting in my arms. I called him Dad, and with a slight smile on his face, he drifted into his final sleep. A few days earlier, when he was still feeling better, he had pulled out a bank card from his pocket. He told me there was 20,000 yuan in it, money he had saved as my dowry. All these years, he had spent most of his earnings on my education. That 20,000 must have been scraped together by pinching every penny. I hadn't had the chance to properly repay him, and he hadn't had the chance to see me walk down the aisle. My tears fell silently on his gray hair. His name was Sam Hui, and he was my father. My name is Nora Hui, and I am his daughter. When I was 6, he gave me my first toy in life, a dirty long-tailed monkey. We depended on each other for 20 years.